Welcome to the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, your host here on the Black Star Network. And today we have a very important conversation that we're going to have around the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson to join the United States Supreme Court. We're going to start with a quote. Quote, Senator James Eastland held up her nomination for months. A wealthy plantation owner known by the trademark cigar that dangled from his lips, Eastland was also known for his daily consumption of scotch. He defended white supremacy like his life depended on it. That is a quote referring to the racist chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator James Eastland from Mississippi, a staunch white supremacist, as he held up the confirmation of the first woman of African descent to serve on the federal bench, Constance Baker Motley. That's taken from Tomiko Brown Nagin's new book, Civil Rights Queen, Constance Baker Motley and the Struggle for Equality. 56 years later, we have Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson, who has been nominated to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. There's 1.8% of the federal bench of 3,840 judges are women, Black of African descent, 70 of those sisters. Of the 1,395 sitting judges, there are 56 Black women in the district courts of the United States of America. And of the 809 appellate judges, only 13 are Black women. So we thought that we would devote today's Black Table to a deeper dive into the confirmation hearings of Judge Brown Jackson, soon to be Justice Brown Jackson. So joining us today are our legal powerhouse roundtable, two of our regular guests. We have two sisters who are going to help walk us through what we've been seeing and what we can anticipate to see. From Howard University, the director of the Graduate Women's Studies Certificate Program and professor of Africana Studies, Valethia Watkins, and from Georgetown Law Center, Georgetown Law Fellow and soon to be professor, assistant professor of law at the American University, Angie Porter. So welcome back, sisters. Welcome back to the Black Table.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We thought that today would be very important. Everybody's talking about, obviously, these hearings. And we thought that at the Black Table, we should have a conversation that'd be a little different. And you know, I know, and the viewers increasingly know that the two of you all consistently are talking about the law. And in this case, you've been nonstop back and forth talking about this. So we figured we get the camera on you two and maybe some of you could share some of what y'all been talking about these last few days. So why don't we open up? Either one of you can start. What are some of your early impressions as we see her, Brown Jackson, wrapping up this week of testimony, which will be her only week? Of course, we know next week there will be other folks testifying for and against. So anybody?
Well, you began with a quote, and it brought to my mind a quote by Anna Julia Cooper from 1892, when she said, "When and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, then and there the entire race enters with me." And what I thought about is that we all collectively felt the conditions and context under which she was being interrogated, and the extent to which she was disrespected and insulted. We certainly, and to have that take place with her parents sitting there, one generation removed from Jim Crow segregation, having lived through that. And I think collectively we felt in the spirit what it meant to be grace under fire. We felt what she probably felt in terms of wanting to really tell them what she really thought. But I think she understood the assignment and she delivered. She definitely was grace under fire. She definitely demonstrated that she has a command of the law, that she is highly skilled, and she demonstrated that she was the daughter of educators, because I think she was able, when given the respectful opportunity to address the substantive issue, to break down complex legal concepts and ideals in a way that is understandable, in a way that the average person could grasp. So I'm looking forward to her in that context, being a liaison to the community and to help people understand the law better.
That's very important. That's one of the reasons why I really am glad that you all were available on short notice for us to have this conversation. Certainly, we've been laughing about the fact that if you speak Ebonics, which includes, of course, verbal and visual cues, you can read all of the shade she's given, particularly those racists on the clipping those consonants at the end of her words and some of those looks on her face. And her parents, of course, as you say, sitting there, two HBCU grads, and her father went to North Carolina Central undergrad. I think her brother went to Howard, didn't he? I think it was undergraduate work at Howard. I mean, the race is all over this thing in so many ways. Angie, what do you think as you've been observing these conversations?
Well, first I want to say, because last time we were together, we talked about several of the women on the short list.
Yes.
And so I just want to start off by, giving them a shout out because I can't imagine how it must feel to have such an opportunity presented to you. People like Leandra Kruger, Michelle Childs, Wilhelmina Wright, and the many others we talked about. And then, that once in a lifetime opportunity is gone. So I just want to say I remember them, while also saying that Ketanji Brown Jackson has shown us that, man, she a bad girl. She a bad girl. And if I'm not infantilizing her, I'm not insulting her. That's the highest compliment. She bad.
Yes.
And folks who underestimate her or who challenge her need to watch out because she a bad girl. And so that's what she showed all of us these last couple of days. And I'm sure, that's what we do. That's what our people do. We go in there, and as you said, if you catch the language, if you catch the cadence, you know what is being said, even without words. And I think that she really channeled that tradition these last couple of days, relying on something that was deep in there in her identity. A friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, Reagan Henderson, she actually works at a law firm. She does diversity work. She was tuning in and she messaged me and said, Angie, I feel triggered. And I think a lot of people said that to me these last couple of days. And I'm sure we've heard that in our community. I feel triggered watching this because, as a Black woman, you have to go in the room and you're overqualified and it's not enough just to be that. And as a lawyer who's watched these confirmation hearings and who's worked for judges and appeared before judges, I just gave a gentle reminder that, hey, this is what they do. This is to be expected behavior. It's political theater. Mm-hmm. They are playing their own game. And Ketanji Brown Jackson is not a spring chicken to this. This is her fourth time going through such a proceeding. This is the most intense one, I would say, but she knows, and she also is playing strategy. She knows when she can nod and when she shouldn't. She knows when she can become impassioned and when she can't. And so I want us to appreciate her agency and her strategy as well, because she is also participating in what has become, unfortunately, over the years, a game. But she played that game. And that's why I say she a bad girl, because she played it well.
That's excellent. In fact, we should talk about that probably when we after we pause in a minute or two for when we come back, because I know you've been reading, among other things, the transcript from the Senate hearings for Thurgood Marshall's confirmation, and you commented on how different that was. And of course, Valika, you remember we were in law school watching Clarence Thomas's confirmations, which were highly politicized. And it made me go back and look and just reflect. Jimmy Carter had no judicial appointments. Of course, the guy who came after him, Reagan, got several bites at the apple with O'Connor and Rehnquist and Scalia. His nomination of Robert Bork, of course, as we know, becomes the turning point. Bork was a pure ideologue. And since then, these hearings have become so incredibly political. And so wondering, as we kind of take the next couple of minutes, what does it say about where we are that Black folk in general and Black women in particular, the handful, have to be almost superhuman in terms of their credentials. I mean, Constance Baker Motley argued 10 cases before the Supreme Court, and she was 9-1. And the one that she lost, Swain versus Alabama, ended up being overturned, and they used her arguments to go. I mean, and Ketanji Brown Jackson is arguably the most qualified nominee in the history of the Supreme Court. What does it say to have to be that? What does that say to y'all about the standard that we are assessed by in this society, particularly Black women?
Well, I think we need to be very careful as we're looking at this, because, one of the things I find problematic is sometimes when Democrats are trying to laud the credentials of one of theirs, they're often prone to quote Republicans as not as a bipartisan way of talking about these issues, but as a way to say, well, they have given a stamp of validation or approval, and you never see the opposite happen. So I think she very much understood. I think what Professor Angie was talking about, Porter, what she was talking about, that she had strategy, and she understood that they were deploying certain very old tropes and traps, landmines in some of the questions they were asking her. And she carefully and very skillfully navigated those traps. And I think to add to what you were saying, Dr. Carr, her ability to use nonverbal communication cues to throw shade, to speak her, to not just passively accept what she was doing, but to very strategically use her body language to clap back in ways that demonstrated that she had agency and self-respect in the face of these kind of attacks.
It was interesting, as we saw, I believe you say, on Wednesday, Cory Booker. I love Cory Booker. He's a beauty, and now his image of America is clearly a fantasy. It's almost like talking about Santa Claus. But she teared up a little there. And Angie, I'm thinking about this, even as you said in a moment ago, the political theater of this. It's almost like everybody's giving campaign speeches. Are y'all lining up to run for president in 2 years? I mean, but last night I was in class, the other night I was in class with my students over at Howard Law. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again, a couple of them were actually in the room for the confirmation. They were actually been able to go in. And one of the things that one of the sisters said was, Cory Booker should have let her speak. You have any thoughts about, not that he was trying to help her, but she can't talk. And so what do you think, about even the rhythm of these debate kind of speeches these senators are giving? Oh, there he is. Yeah. Look at him. He's so happy. Anyway, go ahead. Say something.
Yeah. It's all political theater. And the Republicans are participating in it, but so are the Dems. So they are, as you said, giving their campaign speeches. Everyone's trying to appease their donors and their base. The Republicans are trying to appease their conspiracy theorist base who believe there's a cabal of Democrats abusing children. But Cory Booker also trying to appease his base. So, and I think when Judge Jackson teared up, I think in part it was a release too, as a result of the volley that goes on. Because one thing that they do, if you watch for a sustained amount of time, is that the GOP senators just totally rag on her and attack her, and then the Dems rehabilitate her. And they give her the softball questions. They even suggest answers, or they just answer for her in order to rehab. We call it in the trial process rehabilitation. So I think a lot of that was going on. I think the point I would leave people with is that it is all very much theater, and we should appreciate it as such.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited. We're about to take a break because in this next section, y'all, we're going to hear these sisters get into the time when Judge Brown Jackson has spoken. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this special episode of the Black Table devoted to the confirmation hearings is because we want folk to be able to translate what you're seeing. And so when we come back, we're going to get into this seeming obsession with child pornography from young Josh Hawley out of Missouri, from Ted Cruz out of Texas with critical race theory, and some of these accusations of her being soft in terms of sentencing guidelines coming from these senators, many of whom are from states of the old Confederacy. Let's just call them the children of Senator James Eastland of Mississippi. So back in a moment with the Black Table, and you all make sure you come back for this. You're going to learn something. I think we all will. Back in a moment.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to the Black Table. Greg Carr, Black Star Network, and we're joined today by two of our regular guests in our Legal Scholar Roundtable with Professors Angela Porter and Valethia Watkins. And when we left, we were just beginning, Angie, you had just begun to lead us into a shift from what these senators have been talking to each other and their constituencies about, and Judge Brown Jackson speaking for herself. Help us understand, both of you, and I know it's interesting listening to you all talk about this. You know, what is this stuff around child porn, and what's the stuff about sentencing guidelines? You know, Angie, could you take the first bite at this, maybe, because it seemed like you've experienced some of this stuff firsthand.
Well, yeah, thank you. I did clerk for a federal judge and interned for another federal judge, so I'm familiar with the sentencing process at the federal level. And I think we all know. I mean, we all
actually, if you don't mind, right, interrupt. No, that's very important, because perhaps we can maybe take a clip of Senator Cruz questioning her around these pre-sentencing documents, and maybe that'll, you know, because everybody watched it, but then maybe you can help us translate what we're watching, because I don't think necessarily we know why she responded, how she responded, and what her background prepared her to respond in a context like this. Let's take a second and look at this guy from Texas, Ted Cruz, Raphael Edward Cruz.
Never studied critical race theory, and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
So with respect, I find that a curious statement because you gave a speech in April of 2015 at the University of Chicago in which you described the job you do as a judge. And you said sentencing is just plain interesting because it melds together myriad types of law, criminal law, and of course constitutional law, critical race theory. So you described in a speech to a law school what you were doing as critical race theory. And so I guess I would ask, what did you mean by that when you gave that speech?
With respect, Senator, the quote that you are mentioning there was about sentencing policy. It was not about sentencing. I was talking about the policy determinations of bodies like the Sentencing Commission when they look at a laundry list of various academic subjects as they consider what the policy should be.
Okay, but you were vice chair of the Sentencing Commission, so let me ask again, what did you mean by, because that was an official responsibility of yours, what did you mean by what you were doing was critical race?
What I meant was that there are a number of, that slide does not show the entire laundry list of different academic disciplines that I said relate to sentencing policy, but none of that relates to what I do as a judge.
So, Judge Jackson, all of us will agree that no one should be discriminated against because of race. When you just testified a minute ago that you didn't know if critical race theory was taught in K through 12, I will confess I find that statement a little hard to reconcile with the public record, because if you look at the Georgetown Day School's curriculum, it is filled and overflowing with critical race theory. That among the books that are either assigned or recommended, they include Critical Race Theory, an introduction. They include The End of Policing, an advocacy for abolishing police. They include How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. They include literally stacks and stacks of books, and I'll tell you two of the ones that were most stunning. They include a book called Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through second grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist or though they are not valued or though they are less than, that they are victims, that they are oppressors. I don't believe in any of that. But what I will say is that when you asked me whether or not this was taught in schools, critical race theory, my understanding is that critical race theory as an academic theory is taught in law schools. And to the extent that you were asking the question, I understood you to be addressing public schools. Georgetown Day School, just like the religious school that Justice Barrett was on the board of, is a private school.
Okay, so you agree critical race theory is taught at Georgetown Day School?
I don't know, because the board is not, the board does not control the curriculum. The board does not focus on that. That's not what we do as board members. So I'm actually not sure.
Well, and I'll know.
Well, I'll say this. Lethea, you and my fellow Temple alum, Ibram Kendi, is very happy because apparently Anti-Racist Baby has shot to the bestseller list again. I do chuckle when I do read that book, I must confess in that. Now, Stefanczyk and Delgado's little critical race theory primer, that third edition, is very helpful. That was being taught in class. Georgetown Day, isn't that weird, Brett Kavanaugh? Anyway, the point, though, is what we saw there, Angie, you've been saying this, was, a bit of a sideshow. But when and she answered kind of in a broad sense, talking about her time on, of course, the Federal Sentencing Commission, Sentencing Policy Commission. But you were drawing our attention to how she's been answering the questions that reflect her deepest experience on the bench, namely at the district court level, when it comes to them accusing her of being soft on child pornographers. And could you say something about that? And then maybe later on we'll also enter the conversation around her work as a defense attorney, which they've been trying to hang on her like some kind of badge of shame. But could you help us walk through what we're hearing when Josh Hawley and Cruz and Cornyn and these guys and Graham begin to, and Tom Cotton, attack her around sentencing guidelines? What's going on there?
Well, as you said, she has a deep amount of experience as a sentencing judge. So she is the person on the court with the most time as a trial judge. And I think I have to talk a little bit about the difference between trial work and appellate work. I mean, trial judges are hearing cases, they are seeing parties, they are, seeing trials, and then they do sentence defendants. A lot of their work is sentencing. Appellate judges, so people who are working at the Court of Appeals and people who work at the Supreme Court, they are not hearing trials. They are not sentencing. They are considering other issues based on the record of the trial court. And we can talk about those distinctions more later, but it's important to understand that Ketanji Brown Jackson has the most experience as a trial judge, 8 years. The only other justice to be a trial judge was Sonia Sotomayor, who has 6 years of experience at the trial level. The rest of the justices, excluding Kagan, have all been appellate judges. They don't have sentencing records. They didn't do sentencing. They've been judges who review the record and think about other issues. So it makes total sense for this to be fertile battleground for the Republicans to attack this nominee, because this is what she has been doing. And they did not attack the others on this, save for probably Sotomayor.
Yeah, but she seems to almost have embarrassed them, though, when they begin to start talking about the details of sentencing guidelines.
Yeah.
Could you give us a sense of, for example, when Holly and them start talking about she let people off with lighter sentences, when people are hearing that and assuming that the judge has to follow some type of formula, could you walk us through the sentencing guideline range and what a judge has to take into consideration to make a recommendation?
Absolutely. So there are a number of factors that judges consider when sentencing. One factor that they didn't really emphasize, and I think that was strategy, was you get motions from all sides. So you get motions from the defendant. The defense team is arguing that they should have a certain length of time as a sentence. Prosecutors are also arguing for a certain length of time. The probation office investigates every defendant before sentencing in the federal level, and they prepare a very detailed report. It's not just 1 or 2 pages, it's a packet of that person's whole history, and they plug these values in to the US sentencing guidelines, which is a really complex regime of sentencing guidelines, more complex than the state sentencing guidelines, in my opinion. And so the sentencing guidelines are a whole thing on their own. They came into existence in 1987. And I know that because my own father, who gave me permission to share his story, was facing mandatory sentencing when he was charged with theft of government property. They doctored his charges so that he would fall after November 1st, 1987, and be in the mandatory sentencing guidelines regime. He didn't have to serve a sentence. He was able to win that case, which involved a lot of racism and false statements. But the point is, these guidelines used to be mandatory. Josh Hawley and them want them to be mandatory again. They haven't been mandatory since 2005, when the Supreme Court said, you can't interfere with this type of judicial decision-making, Congress, by creating the sentencing guidelines and basically making this cookbook science for judges to sentence. And the reason for that is because each case is highly individualized. And Ketanji Brown Jackson explained that. You have the arguments from prosecutors. You have the sentencing guidelines. Those are the only 2 factors Republicans emphasize. You have a myriad other factors. The defendant themselves, they usually make a statement at sentencing. Are they remorseful, or are they saying, I'd do it again? That's a huge factor. You have their team arguing what their sentence should be. And in that pre-sentence investigation report, we see a pattern that is more present than most people would think in criminal cases, which is you see the cycle of abuse. You see that defendants often are coming from a situation where they never had a chance at a successful life because maybe they were the victims of child sex abuse. Right. And then it just recycles. And I'll just end by saying, you have witnesses, you have letter writers, you have all of these things. And the only person competent to make that decision is the person who's seen all of that, and that's the judge. And that's why appellate courts give trial judges the discretion on sentencing. They actually defer a lot to the trial judge on sentencing because appellate judges and Congress people in the Senate Judiciary Committee weren't there to meet the real human beings behind the case. So that is enshrined in the system. And these senators are being disingenuous when they act naive about that because they know better. This is not new. This is not news. And they know this, but they're trying to, lodge a political attack.
This is truly upsetting. I mean, it shows you how miserable these people are. And I know you've shared with us your experiences, Angie, working, clerking for federal judges, helping to draft, informing the opinions, the things you've seen, even as a lawyer, when it comes to child pornography and some of the most terrible, most egregious. To sit there and act like she's letting these people off with nothing of what we've just heard. Lethea, I'm wondering, and we're going to get a quick answer from you and then go from a break and come right back, and we'll come back. But I'm wondering, generally speaking, what kind of message do you think this sends, or are they trying to send by this clear distortion of her work?
Well, go ahead. Yeah, I think what she is demonstrating is that, she made the point that this is not a numbers game. She's very sensitive and knowledgeable about the disparity that exists. And what is clearly happening here is that this is, again, as I said before, trafficking in the old trope of associating Blackness with criminality. The whole ideal of Black people being a judge, being soft on crime, or being soft on child abuse. And as a woman, a mother of daughters, to even make that suggestion is absurd. But this is clearly why we have mass incarceration the way that we have, because they no longer recognize the humanity in this. I think the point that she made, it is clear that people are going to return to society at some point. And it's important that they understand what they have done wrong, and that she keeps the human at the forefront. And the ultimate mission of this is rehabilitation, and in addition, punishment proportionality. And I think the fact that her role on the Sentencing Commission has made her very sensitive to the disparity, the wild disparity based on which judge you're in front of, that is built into the system.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take a quick pause, and we should also note, again, I know she didn't set out to do this, but this sister is going to be memed forever with her pregnant pause, the sigh, the lip smack, the consonants. She has been murdering them with the nonverbals. It's like, y'all don't understand what's going on in this hearing. But when we come back, let's pick up around this question of her work as a criminal defense attorney. Because y'all have been having some interesting conversations, and we wanted to share those with the viewing audience here at the Black Table. So we'll be back in a moment. The Black Table, Angie Porter, Lethea Watkins, Greg Carr, talking about Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings. Back in a moment.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is peace.
Oh, no! punch it.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? Welcome back to the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, joined today by two of our great legal scholars, Angie Porter and Valencia Watkins, talking about the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the hearings. When we left, you all were helping walk us through Judge Brown Jackson's experiences and how they're informing her answers in very specific ways. And Angie, you had some thoughts about her sentencing recommendations and how they fall within pretty much the standard range. And then we'll maybe move toward her work as a criminal defense attorney, because I think people may have in their mind one thing when in fact it's something very different in terms of her experiences. But could you say something about, where she fits in the range in terms of these sentencing guideline recommendations that she's been making these decisions about, particularly in the child porn case?
Yeah, I mean, they've chosen child porn as a category and made their little case because they have a political agenda, and their agenda is aligned with wild conspiracy theorists like QAnon people who are emphasizing child sex abuse. And so that's why they chose that category. I mean, you can choose any type of crime category and do this to judges, but they had a very specific agenda. And as it turns out, hers is consistent with most federal judges on child pornography sentencing. So child pornography is a federal crime. The FBI investigates it. It appears in all districts, I'm sure, across the country, because these are online crimes. There's production, there's distribution, there's just viewing. I shouldn't say just, but there's a spectrum of conduct. And that's the one other thing I want to say that Ketanji Brown Jackson was saying. Most people are exposed to one court case in their life. And court watchers see a subset of court cases. You know who sees the most cases? Judges. That's all they do, is they sit and hear cases. And so when you hear one child porn case, you think this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Yes. And they are not, this is not for the faint of heart. This is heinous stuff. Even as she said, reading the descriptions of these images, which I've had to do in my career, is haunting. But think about if you're a judge and you've seen several of these cases. So the first case might seem like the worst, and then you get somebody who's producing, and that's even worse. And then you get someone who received images and you're like, well, this is not as bad as the producer. They're all heinous. This is what I mean by a spectrum of conduct. And sentencing tells us, the sentencing regime that Congress created tells us that the person on this end of the spectrum shouldn't have the same sentence as the person over here. But what you see these politicians who know this falsely claiming is that everybody should get life, they should be under the jail for every child pornography crime. And that's just pure lies. They know that is not how sentencing works.
Now that's interesting, Angie, you bring it up. And Valencia, all three of us have spent time on Connecticut Avenue at Politics and Prose bookstore back and forth. And right next to it is Comet Pizza. And of course, it's Pizzagate. If memory serves me correctly, Valencia, I don't know if you want to jump in. Didn't Ketanji Brown Jackson sentence the guy that drove up from North Carolina with that gun?
Yeah, that was the Pizzagate case, and she was the judge in that case. And she definitely sentenced that person. And he was one of those people listening to the QAnon conspiracy theories. And this seems to be in line with them being angry at her sentencing this person.
Wait a minute, you mean this saying she's soft on child porn, but she should have let this guy who drove up from North Carolina to murder people go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, she only gave him like, what, 4 years?
Yes.
So that they're okay.
The prosecutor asked, I think she gave yeah.
No, what we say the prosecutor asked for what now?
Well, I think he asked for 4. No, he asked for 4 or 4.5, and she gave him 4.
Huh.
So very close to what the prosecutor asked for. But again, they're talking as if the way they want a judge to react in this case is almost like have a computer and you just plug in some factors and always come out at the top end. Then what's the point of having judges if you're just going to be mechanical about it? And so it's important. And that's what Professor Angie talked about, is the spectrum of seeing the disparity and the differences is important. But this soft on crime charge was the very same. If you go back and look at the confirmation hearings with Thurgood Marshall, the very same charges were leveled at him, that he was soft on crime, by Senator Eastland that you mentioned at the beginning. And so, he's coming about at the time of the rebellions in 1967.
That's right.
And they basically were saying crime is rising and it's Black people, and blackness and crime should be conflated, and you're a Black man, so you can't do justice.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, three of us. In fact, the two of you all, because a lot has been made of her work as a criminal defense attorney. And we know that in the appointments that Joe Biden has made, roughly a third of which being women of African descent, non-white women, the charges from this Judiciary Committee have been, particularly if they have any background as defense attorneys, like that's a crime or something. Could either of you speak about that? And Angie, you said some things, interestingly enough. People think she was walking in with her little briefcase, defending people, meeting in the jail with them, but that's not at all her background experience. Or am I overstating that?
No, I think, there are a lot of misconceptions about just how the legal system works, because we are exposed to it through TV, and appellate experience is not as cinematic because appellate lawyers are writing briefs and they are making arguments to judges, but they don't have the jury. They don't even have the client there necessarily. And Ketanji Brown Jackson hasn't been trying to hide this. She said at the confirmation hearing, I was a federal appellate defender. Her Guantanamo Bay clients, she didn't even meet them. And she made a point to say that, like, don't get it twisted. And the Senate Judiciary Committee understands what that means. I think a lot of the public doesn't. They think there's just public defenders who are the ones who you typically see on TV at the trial level, not at the appeals level. The trial level public defenders are the ones who are in the hall with the client, who just met the client right before they came to court, or the one they call in because the person doesn't have or can't afford an attorney. And they are the ones churning and churning and churning cases because they have so many. Federal appellate defense work is going to be different. And again, she owns that. It's important to emphasize that here, because if you think they came down on her for federal appellate work, I mean, Thurgood Marshall's the only other justice with criminal defense work. Judges are overwhelmingly prosecutorial in their background experience. Thurgood Marshall was out here defending. He wasn't a government public defender. He was a private defense attorney. So he didn't work for the government, but he was defending people through the South in these cases where people were getting lynched. I mean, he was working for the NAACP for decades, doing these very overtly related to racial issues cases. And as Dr. Watkins said, they came down on him for that, soft on crime. And so that should have set a foundation for someone like Judge Jackson to come in as a federal appellate defender and do work that's recognized as, very necessary, valuable, and integral to this legal system. But it didn't. And this is why the notion of progress is ridiculous. We are back before Thurgood Marshall. I don't even think this Congress today would confirm Thurgood Marshall. They probably wouldn't even confirm Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because they are so polarized and thinly veiled racists. There's thinly veiled racial contempt. And the idea is normalized that you can't even represent at an appellate level appeals, which are so integral to the Constitution and to the judicial system, because somehow that's soft on crime. It makes absolutely no sense.
Let's talk about that for the next few minutes, and then we'll take our break and come back with our closing segment. This is fascinating. I mean, the whole idea that a Thurgood Marshall wouldn't be confirmable today to the Supreme Court, perhaps even a Constance Baker Motley, whose record probably in comparison would be considered more centrist. Valethia, in the shift, even, like I said, since we were in law school watching Clarence Thomas to now, and then just right before that, Robert Bork with the Reagan administration, have we passed the point now where you can have people nominated and appointed to the federal bench, particularly the Supreme Court? I'm talking about Black people now, who don't fit this kind of cookie cutter Ivy League, double Ivy League. I mean, this was the internal critique of Ketanji Brown Jackson, kind of paint by numbers, don't make any mistakes in your life. Can you have a forceful intellect like a Pauli Murray type or a Thurgood Marshall type? Could they be appointed today?
It would be very difficult for that to happen, because when you talk about, to lean it back to the professional diversity that she's bringing in terms of being a defender, it is just so the public needs to be educated. You are not your client, and so these people claim to love the Constitution, and yet this role of an adversarial system requires that people defend or provide a service to defenders. And so this system provides a very perverse incentive to not only throw the book at people, but those who have political ambitions to be excessively hard. And so the whole notion of justice is totally thrown out of the window. So in terms of the devolution of the system, it's barely functioning. It's very barely functioning as the Senate and Congress as a political institution. And that's why you have a crisis of legitimacy at the Supreme Court. It's so hyper partisan, so hyper political, that people are not looking at the merits of these people's qualifications. They're looking at which team ideologically are you on and who's going to get the political advantage. So there's barely the even pretext any longer that it is about justice, that is about these high principles that they talk about. It's about political gamesmanship and winning at all costs.
Go ahead. Yes.
What you just said about the devolution, Dr. Watkins, I mean, that is just resonating with me, because when we look at the court and how it's changed over the years, a lot of people think we're still in the era of the Warren Court, the constitutional revolution. Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was a hallmark of the court when it was doing a lot of things like creating and recognizing rights, various rights for people, including the right to counsel for indigent defendants, with the case was called Gideon versus Wainwright. And so what you're seeing is this intentional carving back. This is Make America Great Again. But it's, make the judiciary pre-Warren Court. And so they get to normalize this narrative that, public defenders aren't a thing. And why should we value your work? So that to me is really the insidious trend that we're seeing throughout politics, but definitely with the attacks on the judiciary.
Wow.
Well, that goes with your point about them not even funding public defenders and meeting your clients 2 minutes before the trial starts.
That's right.
They've already shown they don't value.
That's right.
Public defenders.
Let's take a pause. We'll take our final pause, and when we come back, this is a perfect segue for us to consider, because she's going to be confirmed, to consider what's next and what cases she'll be hearing, which ones she may even already said she's going to recuse herself from, unfortunately. But we'll continue back in a moment at the Black Table. time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Roland was amazing on there.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig?
Welcome back to the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, joined today by Angie Porter and Belethea Watkins, talking about the confirmation hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson. So as we were talking, let's look ahead. Brown Jackson said that she would recuse herself from the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case, the affirmative action case that the court will be hearing. And any of you all have any thoughts about what Justice Brown Jackson will face on the bench, what the future of the court might look like? Clarence Thomas has been ghost for the past few days. People are speculating perhaps his will be the next seat. I'm one of those people, by the way, that would speculate whenever the next vacancy comes open. I'm thinking it's going to be Clarence Thomas. Any thoughts on what Justice Brown Jackson will be walking into on the court, and how perhaps can we even predict how she would rule on any of these cases?
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting new chapter on the Supreme Court when she gets there. We are facing a historic critical mass of women on the court. We will have 4 sitting judges that are women. And so it's really going to lay bare the fallacy of gender uniting women, because they're going to outreach to Amy Coney Barrett. But I think they will not be able to pierce that conservative veil that she's behind. And so I think we're going to have a dynamic duel in terms of dissent between Sotomayor and Jackson. I look forward to hearing her questioning from the bench and the kinds of the insightful and very powerful dissents that they were right. And I'm not leaving Kagan out. We're going to have 3 women on the liberal wing, which is in a new chapter. But I think Sotomayor and Jackson are going to be the dynamic duel.
Interesting. Angie, what you think? I like the way you phrased that, Belethea. That's going to be because Sotomayor be giving that straight fire. I don't know if y'all saw the per curiam opinion that came down this week as it relates to voting rights in Wisconsin, and she blew them out of the water again. Sotomayor, do you think, Professor Porter, that we're going to find in Ketanji Brown Jackson somebody's going to rival Sonia Sotomayor, who has gotten more and more fiery as she's been on the bench?
You know, it's hard to know. And that's what's been frustrating for a lot of viewers of the confirmation hearing. We're in an era where you can't have strong opinions and get on this court. So again, this is a far cry from Thurgood Marshall. Even the time of Sonia Sotomayor's confirmation hearing,
well,
she mentioned.
Let me ask you. Yeah. So you think perhaps Sotomayor might not be confirmable today?
Honestly, I think, I think she would be confirmable, but I think she would have played her hearing differently, because even then she said that part of her interpretation includes personal and professional experience. And the Congress has become so polarized and shifted to the right that even those are bad words when it comes to judicial interpretation. We've gone from Thurgood Marshall saying that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, that the founders were not profound, that the original Constitution was defective, and that's why it required a civil war and amendments to be corrected. You could not say that today. And Ketanji Brown Jackson actually was the anti-Marshall, and she fell in line during the confirmation hearing by expressly saying there is no living constitution, that she is a textualist, an originalist. These words are music to conservatives' ears. Now, I would add, she's playing the game. This is political theater. The liberal justices have all played this game, saying they've dressed up their language to avoid being activist justices like Thurgood Marshall. And they have still, through textualism and originalism, been able to reason in the way that they've reasoned. So I don't think that those things are an indicator that she's going to be more centrist, but she's definitely marketed herself as being very neutral and very much like Breyer. But only time will tell. These justices can flip.
Let me ask you, I know we were right up against the clock, but I want to ask you all very quickly if you have any comments, because you got some folk in the Black community that say, well, the police union endorsed her, and then they want to harp in on this this Lockheed Martin case. And any thoughts on, for folks who are saying, well, maybe she's a sellout or, Uncle Tom, particularly as it relates to this employment discrimination case that people are trying to hang around her neck, or this idea of the police endorsements? And you want to say, so you shaking your head. So I know you.
I mean, it's just hard. You're reading the tea leaves at this point. It's hard to know from any one case how she's going to be. And remember, she was a district court judge most of her career. It's hard to look at a district court judge's decisions applying law and predict how they will be as a Supreme Court justice interpreting law and basically making legal doctrine. We don't have any clues. She was on the DC Circuit, the appellate court, for less than a year. And that's all strategic. She has not shown her hand. Only time will tell whether she'll be more of a Sotomayor, more of a Thurgood Marshall, more of a Kagan or Breyer. Only time will tell. But it's a lot easier to flip, like Earl Warren did, by the way. They thought he was going to be conservative, and he led the the constitutional revolution. He was the Chief Justice in Brown. Yeah. It's easier to flip when you don't have a boss to report to and when you don't have another confirmation hearing to sit through. So hopefully she will be bold. Only time will tell.
Interesting. Felicia, any last thoughts? Thank you.
Well, I kind of heard what she was doing. I thought she tried to thread the needle a little bit more. I think Professor Porter is right. That she did say some of the buzzword, but I thought it was very interesting that she used the phrase, she has a judicial methodology, not a judicial philosophy, and that she was avoiding a label. And I think that's why the Republicans kept pressing her. But you're right, in order to even get considered, you almost have to have a virgin record, and that's deliberate. Otherwise, you won't get past so many different ideological camps. And so time will tell. I think her hearkening back to history, her being one generation from segregation and acknowledging she's the first generation of the civil rights beneficiary of the civil rights movement is important. But I think what Professor Porter said about this is MAGA, all country revisited, that while she's coming and we're celebrating, the court is going to be using this docket to turn back the clock. And so that's the ironic, bittersweet aspect of what is taking place before us.
Thank you. And Professor Porter, you always remind us that we can't tune out. We have to pay attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Dr. Watkins just said, this court is trying to carve back a lot. They're trying to take us back, and they are doing it. Just yesterday, as you mentioned, Dr. Carr, Wisconsin, that decision, as Justice Sotomayor said, was unprecedented. It was extraordinary. We're talking about voting rights and power being totally displaced, and they're taking race out of everything. And so we have to pay attention. We can't just accept the symbolic significance, even though it is there, and it should not be diminished. But this is just beginning. We've only just begun, and we need to pay attention to these decisions coming up. We need to see not only how Ketanji Brown Jackson makes these decisions, but how the others are holding up, writing their dissents in the 6-3 conservative majority court. And we need to do our damnedest as people to protect our people and continue to be engaged in light of what the court does.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you two sisters for joining us on short notice in this confirmation week and helping our people really think through what we're watching and what we need to be watching here and going forward. We know we have another week of testimony by those witnesses that will come, but she's done as of Friday. So as of today. So thank you. Thank you, Professor Angela Porter and Professor Valencia Watkins for joining us again. We're going to clear the table now at the Black Table. Follow us on hashtag the Black Table on all social media and subscribe to the Black Star Network. Download the app. Follow us across all platforms. We're going to close with the words of a woman who Ketanji Brown Jackson has said is one of her heroes, the great Constance Baker Motley. We'll close as we started. On the 100th anniversary of the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, in 1996, in fact, Judge Constance Baker Motley gave a tribute to Thurgood Marshall. At the end of that tribute, she said, "I would suggest that the alarm in the civil rights community in the wake of recent court decisions overturning voluntary affirmative action remedies in employment and higher education is understandable. After all, it took 60 years to get the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson overturned." By the way, Constance Baker Motley was the only woman in the legal team that helped argue Brown versus Board of Education. She continues and says, "It is truly cause for concern that we may have to wait another 60 years for another Brown decision to usher in a more just theory of equality under our Constitution. It is clear that some vestiges of slavery in Plessy still exist and must be remedied." So we'll close with the words of Judge Constance Baker Motley, one of her intellectual and cultural children, Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson, soon to be Associate Justice Supreme Court of the United States, and the struggle continues. So until next time, join us again at the Black Table, and everybody stay safe, stay vigilant. Talk to you soon.